You may be funny, but do you have what it takes to become a professional comedian? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is up-and-coming comic from New York by way of Pittsburgh, Colin Chamberlain. It all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, and Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. All right, I'm thrilled. Today on Guys Radio, we're going to talk about, well, a lot of things, but we're going to talk comedy, and we're going to talk with a great new upcoming comic. His name is Collin Chamberlain. He's New York based. He's been entertaining audiences for years. He's a terrific guy. I got connected with Colin through our mutual connection, Adam Ferrara, who was on the show recently and who's such a pro and is so terrific. So let me tell you a little bit about Colin. I watched his YouTube channel yesterday. Hello, It's Me. It's a special on there. It's about 45 minutes long, and it is hilarious. I was laughing out loud sitting by myself. He's got a quick wit family stories about growing up in Pittsburgh, one of my favorite cities. He's got a very conversational delivery, so we'll have a conversation today, and his timing is perfect, and you feel like, you know, he's your buddy when you're listening to him, and you can relate to the things he talks about because he talks about real life and the human condition. His debut album is called Hello, It's Me. It's with Helium Comedy Records. It opened at #2 on iTunes and Amazon, and he's performed all over the country, including the Comedy and Magic Club, Caroline's on Broadway in New York, and he's headlined there. Also at the Lucille Ball Comedy Festival. He's got his own podcast, Hell Gigs, and he's been heard on Sirius XM. And we're going to talk about a lot of different things. But first, I want to say thank you for coming on the show, Colin. It's just, I think you're terrific, and I really loved watching you last night in preparation for this conversation. So thanks for being here, and I love Pittsburgh.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, after that intro, I don't know if I can live up to that. That may have been the best intro out of, like, as you know, in entertainment and stuff, people, they go, send me a thing and I'll talk about this. And you go, okay, yeah, I send you a thing. And then they read the thing. Oh, you've heard this guy in clubs and colleges. That was so nice. And I appreciate it. But yeah, I also love Pittsburgh, my hometown, born and raised there. And I will be a Pittsburgher till I die at heart. So no matter where I go.
Well, some of my closest friends, I went to undergrad, Villanova University, right outside of Pennsylvania. And a lot of the kids there, a lot of my friends were from Pittsburgh, including my roommates. And they had all these different terminologies for things. And let's get rinsed and stuff, and going out drinking. And then the Berg, they referred to it. And they had their own little conversations and kind of nomenclature when they spoke to each other that I'm like, what are they talking about here? But they're all great guys, real people. And when I visited Pittsburgh, just the people there are just wonderful. It's a really cool city, and it's not just steel, and it's not just, even though everybody loves the Steelers there, it's a very forward-thinking city and a high-tech city, yet it's beautiful, and they do a great job just taking care of it. So what was it like growing up in Pittsburgh, and how do you touch on the fabric of that special place in your work?
Yeah, I think Pittsburgh was a great, Pittsburgh was a great, speaking of Pittsburgh, there's my dad. It calls me this time every day. That is the most Pittsburgh thing that could happen. Yeah. Hey, we only had a couple of confusions. It's funny, like, that is it. My parents are so born and raised Pittsburgh. I'm of that cloth of like, hey, at 2:00 is when I call, and I guaranteed. My parents have been divorced for a while now. Guaranteed, my dad calls me at 2:00. By 2:35, I'll have a text from my mother. I go, are you okay? Are you okay? Why didn't you answer your father? These two don't talk. They don't hang out. But this will get back to her, and she'll go, are you all right? I mean, but that's it. Pittsburgh is a town where I feel like it's real people. And, I know everybody's a real person, but it really is just like an honest, hardworking town. When I'm in New York, a lot of times I feel like New York has this generalization of like, you're either from Boston or you're from New York or you're from the South. And those are the only places that they know. And a lot of times people will come to me and go, they'll hear me talking. I go, are you from the South? And I go, no, I'm from Pittsburgh. And they go, isn't that near Philly? I'm like, it's farther from Philly than we are right now, and there's this sense now, the Pittsburgher in me will never let anyone tell me that Pittsburgh and Philly is the same place, because it's, born into you that, right. It's not. But yeah, I just feel like it was a great place to grow up. It was a great place to start comedy, because there's also this sense of in Pittsburgh where everybody at a comedy club, all the audience members, think they are just as funny as you, if not funnier. And some of them are right. But there's this thing of like, listen, we got a babysitter. We had to park. We had to go through a tunnel to get here. Like, do you know how much drinks cost? And it's like, prove it. You better prove it, So I think that's a very Pittsburgh mentality.
Let me ask you this: as a comedian, I have a lot of empathy for your work. You, not just you, but comedians in general, because there's such an expectation where somebody asks you, "What do you do for a living?" "I'm a comedian," and they're going to look at you and say, "Make me laugh," or even say that. I'm sure you hear that all the time, and it's not fair, because it's like a boxer. It's like, I'm a boxer. Well, you want to fight? You don't do that. So you get paid for what you do, and you turn it on and off. And it's interesting that I have a very good friend. We mentioned him before the show began, from high school. I'll just say his first name. His name is Brad, and he wasn't the funniest kid in school by any means. Yet now he's a professional performer and comedian, and he's got his 8-minute piece, and he also does a one-man show. Tell us about that, kind of being a comedian, and how were you the funniest kid in school? How you kind of made the transition from, hey, I'm a kid from Pittsburgh, to, hey, you know what, I can do this? Or what were you all that stuff, your influences? How did you get this thing going?
Yeah, I think growing up, I was by no means the funniest kid in school. I think I had, my family all has a very good sense of humor. I think I always credit that. I get my sense of humor from my mom, and I get my sort of business mentality of comedy from my dad. But everybody in my family is very funny. I was pretty quiet growing up. Comedy for me was always a defense mechanism. You know what I mean? It was always like, if I was funnier before somebody else, then they couldn't make fun of me. I would if I made fun of myself, they didn't have a chance to do it. So when you grow up like that, it's sort of just ingrained in you that funny is first. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like collateral. If you could be funny, you could do things and get away with things and stuff like that. But not the funniest kid in school by any means. I feel like things really started to click when I was in college. My dad used to do comedy. Before I was born, he did a little bit of comedy. He was sort of got to the level of like local MC, you know what I mean? He had some friends that would say, "Hey, come open for me," and stuff like that. And he always had sort of this dream of being in radio and entertainment, which he eventually did live out, because now he has a podcast that is more successful than mine, but that's neither here nor there. But shout out to my dad.
Maybe I should have him on.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're gonna zoom him in. But no. So he started. There was a comedy club. Really, how it all shook out is I was always interested in comedy. I loved comedy albums and DVDs and specials. I really loved it. But I never took it seriously. I never thought it was something I would do. And then my dad started emceeing when I was in college, a local comedy club that opened for like 2 years and shut down because it was, I think, a front for some other money laundering thing, but like some comedy clubs are. And he was emceeing there, and I would go and watch the shows. And I would do 10 minutes of crowd warm up, and he was good at it. And then they'd bring out a feature, and then they'd bring out like a headliner that maybe was on Last Comic Standing a few years ago. Not huge names, but these guys and girls that were killers. In their own right. They were really funny. They just never got a big break. And I watched these people and just was like intoxicated. I just thought in my head, like, if I could do what they're doing for just 5 minutes, if I could just have the smallest role on the show, I think I would be so happy. And I became so obsessed with it. And then I took a class because I thought that's how you learned anything. I just figured like comedy was like painting, right? If you want to learn how to paint, you take a painting class. I took a class with my dad, which is very formative. And we did this class together, and at this little black box theater in Pittsburgh. And there was a class show. and they would name like a class clown, and that was, you were like the best in class. I ended up winning that title, which was on my bio for far too long. And it was on my resume for way too long. But I'll never forget this moment. I was out with my dad and my sister after the show. We were at this chain of diners in Pittsburgh called Eaton Park. If anybody's listening to this is from Pittsburgh, this is where like you go after a high school football game, a graduation, any big night this is where you go. And we're sitting in a booth, and I'm just like through the roof because it was the first show I'd ever done, and it felt like, looking back, it was not good, but for what I was doing, it was the best show I'd ever done because it was the only show I'd ever done. And my dad looks at me and he goes, "Well, there's no turning back now, is there?" And I go, "Nope." And he knew it, and I knew it, and that really was the point where I said, I don't care what else I have to do, but this has to be my life, because this is the most fun feeling in the world. It really is. When comedy goes well, it's the best thing in the entire world. When it goes bad, it's all on you, and you sit in a Radisson and you're like, what am I doing? Like you start applying for jobs. But it really, I think that's a long version. I've tried to make it sweet, but a long version of how I got into it.
So what was two things? One, what was the first joke, if you can remember, that you wrote? And is there a template for writing jokes? Because, we all know people that are super quick-witted and they're fast, but they're not comics. They're not professional comedians. And there's an art, and there's a little bit of a science to it, I guess, also. I know you kind of poked a little fun at taking a class for it, but there are some structural things. It's like writing a book or anything else. You really need to know some of the basics. So could you share with our audience kind of like, what are some of somebody who might be sitting out there listening saying, I'm pretty funny too, but I'm not sure what to do. So how do you kind of assess yourself? How do you write a joke?
Yeah. For me, you sort of said it earlier, like I consider myself more conversational than I would do like a setup, more like than like a Stephen Wright or a Mitch Hedberg, I'm a little more conversational, but within that conversation, there still has to be jokes. There has to be things that people laugh at. So my process is, I like to pull from real life. I like to talk about things that have happened and then exaggerate it. So I sort of start with it. And actually, Adam was the guy that gave me some of the best advice. When the first time I was working with him, I had this big, long story about taking a fighting class, a boxing class, essentially. And it all ended with this punchline of like, to get out of it, I like peed on the guy. It was not highbrow humor by any means, but it was a joke that I felt like was doing well for being a couple years into comedy. And I remember him, and it was so kind to do this because he knew that joke could be a lot better. He didn't make any comments about the punchline or anything, but he did say, you have to write about the story. Don't write the story, write about it. And to me, that's something I really try to remember, was like, I was so stuck in the narrative of like, I went here and then I did this and then this happened and I did this, and felt like everybody in the audience needed to know that narrative. And that's not the case. What they need to know is who's there, why are you there, what's going on around you, what are the funny things that you're seeing. So I start there. I start with a story, and then I write it real big. I get the whole thing fleshed out, and then I go through with the red pen and I start editing. It's a process that I think a lot of comics would call trimming the fat, where you go through and you go, is this funny? No, then it's gone. If this doesn't serve a purpose to the joke, then it has to go, So there are some tricks that you could always, like the rule of threes and repetition and misdirection. I remember, I think one of the first jokes that I told, oh my God, I think one of the first jokes that I told was like a joke about McDonald's used to have something called Mighty Kids Meals. And I said, like, Mighty Kids Meals are supposed to make you fast and more powerful. The only thing it ever made me was moist, or something like that, and it was this silly little joke, and And it sort of plays on this thing of like you're leading them down the thing of this is what they say they're going to do, this is what they actually does. Moist. You start to find funny words, right? Like to me, moist is a funny word. Your brain starts to go, okay, if the joke involves cologne, what's the funniest name for cologne I could think of? Her, you start to embellish different things. Like if you're driving a car, well, Honda is a word, but is Hyundai funnier? Maybe Hyundai is funnier because it's how it ends, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So little things like that, little tricks that you find. And really the only thing, if you are listening and you go, I'm funny and I want to do this, there is nothing more important than getting on stage and doing it. You can practice this. You can write 1,000 pages of jokes in your apartment, in your home, and you can practice in front of the mirror. You can time yourself. Nothing will prepare you for comedy other than doing comedy. It is the only art form that you have to literally fail and practice at in front of people,
Let me ask you this. That is so astute, and thank you for sharing some of the tips, because I know, there's competition out there. But the first time you stepped on stage, what did you learn about your material? Where you have probably had ranked the jokes and put them in some type of sequence, and then when you get out there, everything probably goes topsy-turvy.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll never forget. It still happens to me. And if I think if it's not happening to you, you're not working. So I remember the first few times I got on stage, I did well. I did pretty well. I sort of had a natural ability to like tell a story that carried me, and then nervous energy is funny to a point. So I had a lot of nervous energy when I was on stage when I first started. And that can sometimes fake and fill in the holes of your material. Now, where it starts to fall off is after those first couple of times when you're like, I'm getting pretty good at this. And then you go to an open mic and you have too much confidence and you go up there and you swing for the fences and nobody laughs. Then you really start to test your material. But, you made a good point of like where you rank things and then how it's actually received. I mean, I had a joke. This is so silly to when you break it down like this, but I had a joke that was a throwaway joke, a joke that I wrote that I did off and on for a few years that like was basically just a time filler. If I couldn't think of anything else, if I had to stretch, I could put this joke in. It was a joke about going to the dentist. And I never really cared about this joke. And then one day I was like, I should work on that. And every time I did it up to this point, it was 50-50 reaction. One day I just started working on a little bit. I put it in the front of my set to sort of test it at a few bar shows and open mics. And it started to get a little traction. And it started to get a little bit more. And then you're like, oh, there's something here. And right now it is one of my favorite jokes. It's the joke that I opened my set with. It's about a 6-minute bit, with a bunch of jokes in about going to the dentist and stuff. And it's a joke that people are like, after a show, they go, I love the dentist joke. And it's crazy to think that like a joke started, sometimes it takes 4 or 5 years to really figure out what's going to happen with this joke. But it started as something that I didn't really care about. It was just something I could throw in and out of my act if I needed it. And now it's sort of a foundation of my act right now. So you just don't know. And that's why you have to test it. That's why, and you have to give things time. That's the other thing. Comedy takes so much time. It's the most gratifying thing that you can do. And it's the most frustrating thing that you can do, I think.
Amazing. And great answers. Thank you. So my special guest on Guys Radio, Colin Chamberlain. I'm loving this conversation. What I'd like to do is just keep going for a while, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we're getting a lot of information out there for our audience and also learning more about you and your material. So if you want to, do you want to share that joke, or you want to tell people, hey, if you want to hear my dentist joke, you better check out my act? It's up to you.
Well, I'll tell you, it's still sort of a work in progress. I haven't recorded it yet, but there is actually a clip of this joke that went pretty viral on TikTok and Instagram of this dentist joke, which you can check out. But the premise of the joke is as that dentists, I don't believe that dentists are real doctors. Now, when you open with something like that, you immediately get everybody's attention, right?
Right, yeah.
Now, and sort of the premise is that like that everything in a dentist's office is done by someone else. It's all done by the hygienist. And if you needed a doctor and you called a doctor and a dentist showed up, you'd be in trouble, right? Like, so there's obviously a lot more to it, but that's the thing.
That's great. It's a
you
great
go
theme.
and you go like, it's almost one of the things where you go, dentist, that's probably been covered. And it's like airline food. And then you find a take on it and you start asking your friends. I asked all my other friends that are comics, like, have you ever heard this before? And they go, no, like, I don't know. It just seems like kind of overdone. And like, I've never heard that. And then you do it and you do it and you do it and you go, oh, this is taken on its own life. And now, like I said, it's something that like I love doing. It's one of my favorite jokes to do. And the next time I record something, it's probably gonna be in it.
What's amazing about what you do, Colin, is that comedy can be, some say it's like an attack, and you pick out things like airline food or fast food or dentist, whatever, and you pick at them and you bring out the human condition and humor out of it. But you do it in a way that's not acerbic. You do it in a conversational, fun, friendly way. How do you what's going on in your estimation with kind of the comedy category, if you will, with your type of humor versus some of the more pointed comics that are out there today that are more like attack dogs?
Yeah, I am always going to be a defender of comedy. As long as you're making people laugh and people are having a good time, who am I to say what you're doing is wrong? I will certainly talk to my friends about the jokes that my other comics will sit at a diner and go, can you believe I told this joke? And then when you come over to me, I'll go, that was a great joke. Yeah, like, because you're coworkers, you have to be civilized. But I think for me, I've never really done anything too pointed or opinionated. My philosophy is that like, when I get on stage, I started at a young age. I started when I was 20. So like when I got on stage, I was always performing for people that were older than me. And my first thought was, they do not care what a 20-year-old has to say about gas prices, about insurance, about whatever. And my first instinct was always like, well, what do I know is funny? What I know is funny is this story about my dad or my sister, or about dating, a date that I went on, not, and something like that. It's just something that, and I always had this like feeling too, because when I first started, my parents did come to a lot of shows where I didn't want to say anything that I would be embarrassed to stay in front of them.
Right.
So there was this thing of like, I didn't really swear. I didn't really talk about anything too like over the top. And it just sort of was naturally who I am on stage. I think that's the beauty of comedy, is there really is something for everybody. I mean, you see it politically, socially, and all ends of it, clean, dirty, blue, raunchy, not raunchy, whatever it is. Like, there are comedians that are conservative, there are comedians that are liberal, there are comedians that are more thought provoking, there are comedians that just tell silly stories. But if you like it, you just go find them. That's the beauty of it.
No, that's a great way of looking at it. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important, because it can be very competitive. So if you're out with your buddies and there's 4 comedians and you're at a diner and you're sharing a couple of jokes, I know from my background in the world of advertising, I've seen takeoffs on other people's ideas all over the place. Like, I go from one agency to the other. I'm like, they're doing that idea that we talked about a while ago, and it's not kind of their ideas. How do you, and I'm sure there's just subconsciously, there's some gleaning from other material in terms of concepts. How do you kind of deal with that? And is there a code amongst comics about, like, obviously you're going to, everybody's experienced some of the same things, so you want to share that, but you're not going to be blatantly ripping off somebody else's material. Where do you draw the line there? And how does that work among the code of comedians, if you will?
Well, there's no secret in comedy. There are no kept secrets in comedy. If someone is doing a joke that they even assume is somebody else's joke, it will spread like a wildfire. You don't even have to be at that show to see it, and you will have developed an opinion on whether that person has stolen a joke. For me and my friends, if we're out, that's one of the most helpful things for me, is to get with 2 or 3 other comics that I trust and understand how I write, and I understand how they write. And we pitch jokes to each other. And we go, hey, I got this joke about, exit rows on airplanes or something like that. And they go, okay, yeah, say this. And then they go, I got this joke about, the Tinder date I went on. I go, okay, yeah, say this. And we're happy to. One of my favorite things to do is to punch up another comic's jokes, because you're giving an outside perspective. And then here's the best part. You give, like, I'll do this to my friends all the time. And they'll do it to me too, so I don't feel bad. So we're at a club or something, and I watch their set. Maybe there's 2 shows, and I go, hey, that joke you did? Here's a tag. Maybe this line might work in between. And they go, okay, thanks. And then they'll do it on the next show, and I'll watch. And if the line I gave them works, after I'll be like, you're welcome. But if the line I gives them doesn't work, I'm like, hey, you didn't do it right. Like, you didn't do it the way I said, you didn't time it right. We're all little egomaniacs like that. But as far as, like, there's always going to be some parallel thinking. I had someone comment on a clip I posted on YouTube, and they were like, wow, you took 2 of Nick Swardson's jokes. Now, I think Nick Swardson's probably a great guy. I've never met him, and I've never watched any of his stand-up. Is it possible, in the realm of all things that you could talk about as a comedian, that we've touched on 2 things the same way? It is possible. It is possible, but that is what is fun and challenging, and also a bit different with sort of the modern era of comedy, where everything is posted and commented on, and you go, well, you're seeing a piece of this, you're only seeing a piece of this. Come to a show and see the whole thing, and then tell me what you think.
What's it like? And again, my special guest, Colin Chamberlain. We're talking about comedy here. He's amazing. I highly recommend his work. It's just funny, and as you can tell, he's such a great guy. So thanks for being here. But when you walk into a comedy club and you're going to check, you're the comic, you're going to go out on stage. Maybe you're part of different comics working that club. How do you assess the audience? And do you assess the audience? And how do you pick up the energy? And do you make any tweaks to your delivery based on what you see out there? Like, uh-oh, these people are really smashed. Or that couple over there, watch that guy, or whatever. Or have you heard from the other comics who maybe you were listening backstage, like rough crowd, or like this is a good crowd, or the regional crowd, whatever? How do you make all those assessments and instantly before you get out on the stage, or even when you're on the stage, and say, all right, I gotta flip things around?
Yeah, I think that is a fantastic question, and it really is one of, like, my favorite things about comedy, where you are constantly, it's fluid, it's alive. Comedy is meant to be seen live. I'm very proud of the work that I've put out, but I am more proud of the show that I will give you on a Friday or Saturday or Thursday, whatever night it is, because that's what it's supposed to be. So I will usually poke my head out at the audience and say, okay, they're a little older, they're a little younger. Like, you made a good point. Are they drunk? Have they been drinking? Who is being noisy? If someone is being noisy, who is it? So I have an idea of where that's coming from if I have to address it. You're always talking to other comics. How are they? How are they out there? Good, bad, a little tight. Okay, thanks. Yeah, all right, they're the guy up front. He's a little drunk. All right, great, thanks, appreciate that. You're talking to the staff. Maybe you go, hey, is that guy drunk? Okay, yeah. Would you mind just keeping an eye on him? Sure, yeah, we'll keep an eye. Those kind of things. And then once you're on stage, then it really turns on. And to go back to a guy like Adam, where I've always respected Adam, because I feel like he comes from a very, like, Zen place of comedy. One of my, and somebody else who I idolized was Gary Shandling. And I just was so obsessed with any podcast or book or show he did. And to me, his thing was all about being present, being in the moment. Comedy is about being in the moment. And of course, you write these jokes and you work on them and you perfect them, but you still have to be with the audience there. So I think as long as you're in the moment and you're assessing as you go. Okay, I've certainly felt like I'm losing them a little bit. It's time to ramp up the energy, or, oh, I need to slow down because they are not picking these up as quickly as I thought they were,
Interesting.
Be a little louder. I mean, it's sometimes it's just as like, this table isn't heckling. They're just a little chatty, and there's really no reason to address it right now and upset the show. But I'm just going to move my body in their direction, not even look at them. I'm just going to move to that side of the stage where they are, just so they feel I'm closer, and they feel that that I'm near them, and they go, oh, okay, they could probably hear me. Things like that.
Let's take that to the next level, Colin. Hecklers. I guess every comic has had to deal with hecklers, and you probably have a couple of arrows in your quiver in terms of how to deal with them based on what the type. You kind of touched on it, but what type of abuse you're getting. To me, like if somebody who goes to a comedy club, they pay money. That you can clap or boo or whatever. I guess the same thing as at a ball game wherever you pay your money. But I mean, what type of person heckles somebody who's up there trying to make them laugh? It seems like that's a very specific type of behavior that you have to know how to deal with. And again, the heckler is sitting there; they don't have a mic. You have the advantage in that you've dealt with hecklers, you have a mic, but still you're dealing with somebody that's probably kind of a jerk. How do you do that in a nice way, or do you do it in a nice way?
Well, you have to, that's something you got to sometimes roll the dice on. Because I would say for me, what my experience is that most of the time it isn't somebody trying to upset the balance of the show. What it is somebody having a really good time, and they go, the line will be like, blah, blah, blah. And, I drive a Prius. And then they go, he drives a Prius, right? And they yell that out. And they're just they're like a overexcited cheerleader. And you got to go, hey, I'm glad you're having a good time. But, you need to settle down just a little bit, because I can hear you and everybody around you can hear you. So you almost make them feel a little silly for being caught. But you go, hey, I get that you're having a nice time, and I appreciate that. Now, on those sort of smaller percentages that they are really trying to disrupt the show. I mean, I've had people,
or they're drunk.
They're drunk, right? It's always that they're drunk, because right. A heckler, it's like a firework, right? It's like they have a lit firework in their hand where it goes off and it's this explosion. They go, well, now what do I do? Right? They get that one thing out of them. And my thing, I just try to engage and go, what were you trying to do? And they usually have no answer, right? I go, no. Tell me what you thought that would add to this show. Like, I really am curious. Like, if you, what did you think what was gonna happen after you said that? And they usually get caught and they have no idea. But I have had a few people, and it does seem to be happening a little bit sort of more post-pandemic. And I give people the benefit of the doubt. I think it's because, during the pandemic, people were getting on Zoom happy hours and drinking a bottle of wine and passing out on the couch. That's what they were used to for 2 years. They were used to just the fridge was the bar. Now they're going out and they forgot that, they're in public, and they forget that they're around other people. And they're used to polishing off, a bottle of White Zinfandel on their own. And now they're at a comedy club and there's 40 people around them, and they forgot how to whisper. So
all of them, right?
Oh, yes, right. So you get people that are drunk, and by then, if it gets to that point where they're really making a scene, hopefully the club gets involved.
Got it.
Now, I have had the times where you're in a club and you go, I am truly alone up here. They have given the keys to the convicts, and I am the only warden left. And you just, then it's just a run out the clock situation. Wow. I've had a few yelling matches with people, and you go, you know what? It's just not even worth it. Right. Like, and it's just, I'm just going to do my act. And I always try to remember this too, that if you can convince everybody else in the show that this person is upsetting the night and disrespecting them, because that's the other thing you try to say is, listen, hey, I'm getting paid the same way. Whether you heckle me or not, my check is the same at the end of this weekend. the people around you all spent money to be here. They all had to fight for parking. They all had to find a babysitter. And those are the people that you're really upsetting. You're not upsetting me. You're upsetting these people. And then that starts to click in people's head. They go, yeah, I can't hear. Be quiet. So if you can, it's mob mentality. If you can convince the audience to turn on that person, let them take care of it.
Now, you touched on something interesting, and that is the pandemic. And I got to think it's been really tough, particularly for people who do your work, the comedians, because first you had Zoom, and people communicate differently on Zoom. It's like one person speaks and everybody listens, where if you had a group of people together, people talk over each other organically, and that's cool. But on Zoom, everybody's got all these special, it's more dutiful, if you will. So you get people off of Zoom, back out in the clubs. As you say, they've been walking past the refrigerator 50 times a day. Everybody's got their COVID-19. They drink too much. Now they're out in the club. They've been wearing a mask. Some of the clubs probably still have mask rules. You have the mandate stuff. How do you deal with all of that? Is there a way to make the pandemic funny without insulting people who may have lost somebody to this? And then, things that have been going on for so long, and so many people now are saying, you know what, I don't want to hear this anymore. Let's just do our thing. How do you process and deal with all of that? It's a lot for a comic.
Yeah, certainly. For me, what I have realized is that people, and I'm the same way, where it's like when people are going out to a show now, the last thing they want to hear about is the pandemic. They're coming out to get away from it, And there are people that still do jokes, and they do really good jokes. And I never had some, during the pandemic and the Zoom shows, of course, I had a list of jokes that I could sort of fall back on that were poignant at that point in time. But to me, it's like real life resumes. We're back to real life. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, as a comic and working through that, I am so appreciative of any live show with an audience now, after having to do shows on Zoom, that I am just happy that there are people there. If it was such a tough time, I think, if you were in any sort of entertainment, to go like, am I going to have a job? Will people care about this kind of stuff? And then you start to transition into Zoom comedy, which is a nightmare. Right. And you go, oh my God, like anything but this. And then, so as things come back, you go, listen, I don't care if there's 4 or 400. I'm just happy that they're here in front of me,
Okay. One more question. And then I want to get to promoting your work, your podcast and your album. But when you travel around the country, what's your sense in terms of, are there certain cities like you prefer playing, or you think your material works better versus others? I know my buddy who's a comic, he was telling me a story about, they didn't laugh in San Diego. And I'm like, well, think about the material, think about who your target audience is. And you have the New York crowd where you get tourists. So you can go into Caroline's and you have people from Tulsa in the audience, or you get the people from Jersey, and it's a very, very different mix there. And then you have LA. And having moved from New Jersey and New York to the West Coast, I can see there's a completely different vibe. And even though I've been out here a million times, until you live out here, you don't really see the distinct differences. And then there's everything else. And I don't mean it everything else in a derogatory, diminishing way, but how do you kind of map out your work and your perspective based on the market you're in?
Yeah, I think you have to take it into some consideration, right? I am someone that I try to fit all audiences. Just living in New York, you have a great opportunity to go, I'm going to go to a Caroline's, or I'm going to go do a show in Manhattan that's going to be more of a mixed crowd of tourists and native New Yorkers, and more representative of maybe the rest of the country. And but I can also go to Brooklyn and do more of an alternative show where they're a little hipper, or or it's younger and more artistic. So can you do both of those rooms? That is ideally, for me, the goal is to work in both of those rooms. I have found that there are certain cities that you have an experience there, and it either you make all of your assumptions off of one experience, right? I like Omaha, Nebraska. To me, Omaha was a place where people would joke about it. They go, what are you doing? You're playing Omaha this weekend? To this day, Omaha, Nebraska is top 3 cities I will love to perform in.
I love it.
I will go to Omaha, Nebraska at the drop of a dime. It is the Funny Bone in Omaha, Nebraska is one of my favorite clubs. That's some of the best shows I've had. The people there are fantastic and the club is fantastic. And I would feel, that way about a few other cities. There's like Cleveland, being from Pittsburgh. I never thought I would say I love Cleveland, but like it's just a great city and the club is great. It's more about the experience. Now, I've had experiences in Tampa where I go, if I never come back to Tampa, I'll be okay. Like I don't know if I could step foot in Tampa ever again. So things like that you start to make your assumptions on. But for the most part, for me, it's like, hey, these are regular people. Hopefully they want to hear these jokes. Hopefully they work for everybody. That's my goal, is to be able to play to as many people as possible.
Well, you do a great job, and I'm so glad you've been here with us on Guys Radio. I hope you come back because I've got about 30 other questions I didn't get to, but let's talk about your podcast, Colin, and also your comedy album and where our audience can learn more about you and find you.
Yeah, so my podcast is called Hell Gigs. It is a podcast where I talk to other performers, comedians, and musicians, and about the worst shows that they have done. And the idea of it came from when you're in a green room of a comedy club and there's other comics there. That's the first thing you start talking about. You go, I just saw you were in Toledo. It was the MC that does the thing with the puppets there. And you go, oh my God, the MC with the puppets. He was in Toledo. You got my name wrong. And you start talking about that. And that to me was always the funniest part of the show. It was talking about, I just did this show in Poughkeepsie and there was no stage and no microphone and no chairs. And that
premise.
Was like,
very good premise for a show. Love it.
And it was something that like you could relate. I have talked to so many comics that I've never met in real life because of cool. Everything now was Zoom. You talk to them for 5 minutes about a show that they did where they didn't do well on, and you are instantly on the same page. You go, I know exactly what you're feeling like, Okay.
So Hell Gigs. So Hell Gigs, and then your album.
Yeah, my album is called Hello, It's Me. It's my debut album. It's the special is for free on YouTube, and the album is on iTunes and Amazon and Pandora, and I think they're also playing it on Sirius. So check it out. I'm very proud of it.
Website
is collincomedy.com, and that's all my social media. Instagram and TikTok and Twitter is all Collin Comedy.
Fantastic. Listen, you do a great job, man. And I think you'd be perfect for a TV series because you're somebody that I think anybody across the country can relate to. You're conversational, you're friendly, you're authentic. I think you do a great job and you're very funny. So thanks for being on Guys Radio. I hope we can do it again, Colin.
Thank you so much. Absolutely.
If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week on Guys Radio and TV, please help out by subscribing to my channels. Thanks for your support.